A reading from Proverbs. Do not put yourself forward in the king's presence, or stand in the place of the great. For it is better to be told, "Come up here," than to be put lower in the presence of a noble. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Our psalm today is Psalm 112, and we read it responsively. Hallelujah! Happy are they who fear the Lord and have great delight in his commands.
Their descendants will be mighty in the land. The generations of the upright will be blessed.
Wealth and riches will be their house, and their righteousness will last forever.
Light shines in darkness for the upright. The righteous are merciful and full of compassion.
It is good for them to be generous in lending and to manage their affairs with justice.
The righteous will be kept in everlasting remembrance.
They will not be afraid of any evil rumors. Their heart is right. They put their trust in the Lord.
Their heart is established and will not shrink until they see their desire upon their enemies.
They have given freely to the poor, and their righteousness stands fast forever. They will hold up their head with honor.
The wicked will see it and be angry. They will gnash their teeth and hide away. The desires of the wicked will perish.
A reading from Hebrews. Let mutual love continue. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing that some have entertained angels without knowing it. Remember those who are in prison, as though you were in prison with them, those who are being tortured, as though you yourselves were being tortured. Let marriage be held in honor by all, and let the marriage bed be kept undefiled, for God will judge fornicators and adulterers. Keep your lives free from the love of money, and be content with what you have, for he has said, "I will never leave you or forsake you." So we can say with confidence, "The Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What can anyone do to me?" Remember your leaders, those who spoke the word of God to you. Consider the outcome of their way of life and imitate their faith. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. Through him, then, let us continually offer a sacrifice of praise to God, that is, the fruit of lips that confess his name. Do not neglect to do good and to share what you have, for such sacrifices are pleasing to God. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Go and sit down at the lowest place. And then when your host comes
may say to you, "Friend, move up higher." Then you'll be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. He also said to the one who had invited him, "When you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, in case they may invite you in return and you would be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind. And when you will all be blessed, because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Please be seated. When I was a kid, thousands of years ago, all the kids in the neighborhood would all play together because we were all about the same age. Within 3 or 4 years, we would do all those things that kids did then. In the summer, we played baseball in an empty lot. We played football in the fall and basketball kind of most of the year because we always had a basketball hoop stuck on the end of the garage. In the summer, we would chase butterflies and ride bikes and all of those things that kids do outside. We would go from morning until dark, but we always knew when it was time for supper, because there was one of the dads in the neighborhood that had this booming voice, and he would always cry out, "Jim, Nancy, it's time for supper!" And that kind of resonated throughout the neighborhood. I don't know, maybe throughout all of town, who knows? Everybody knew it was time to go home then. That was the time to go for supper. Oftentimes we came out later than that to chase lightning bugs and stuff. But once you got home, you sat down at your dinner table. How many of you had a place that you always sat? It seems like around the dinner table there was always kind of like assigned seating, kind of like in church, you had your spot. And then if there was a company that came over and your spot was taken, you were kind of confused, kind of like you are here at church if somebody takes your pew. And, seating arrangements are like that. Then it comes time for holidays, and you have the adults table, and you have the kids table. And I'm not sure what the qualifications were to graduate from the kids table to the adults table. I never understood why the adults got to pass around their own food, but for the kids, somebody came over and filled their plate for you. You weren't allowed to have your own food there, I guess. Meals are kind of interesting like that, aren't they? And then there are weddings. When you have weddings, families spend hours trying to figure out the place cards. Who is going to sit next to who? Who has to sit next to the preacher? That's always a tough one. Who are they going to sit next to me? And then I can try to figure out who these people are. They spend all of this time. Who sits in the front of the banquet hall? Who sits in the back? And which table eats first? That's always an important one. Does it make a difference as long as everybody gets something to eat? I was talking to somebody last week at the picnic, and they had served 30 years in the Army, and they had retired with a very high rank as a non-commissioned officer. And one of their duties was to train new officers. So they had a hard time convincing them that the officers ate last. So always feed the troops first. He said, I always looked at him and said, so why is that? He said, number one, because I told you so. And number two, because you always feed the troops. If you run out of food, you don't want to have the troops be hungry. They need to be fed. So these logistics around meals are nothing new. As I said in the Gospel of Luke, there are many stories of food, many stories of banquets. And on this particular occasion, Jesus went to the house of one of the Pharisees, and it was the Sabbath. I'm not sure who was cooking, because if you remember, there was to be no work done on the Sabbath. So I guess there was somebody back in the kitchen that was a Gentile or something. But anyway, they were there for this meal on the Sabbath, and Jesus was watching everybody taking their seats. Kind of like Jackie watching people come up today. Jesus was kind of watching. And there must have been a clear head of the table, maybe a tall gold chair or something that designated which one was the head. And it was clear that there was some hierarchy of who was sitting where. And never one to miss the opportunity for a teaching arrangement. Jesus says, don't forget. Jesus always speaks on behalf of the poor, the downtrodden, the forgotten. Jesus clears his throat and says, when someone invites you to a wedding feast, remember that the hosts have spent a lot of time making out the place cards. Don't assume that you are going to be sitting at the front table near the bridal party. Look for your seat toward the back. And then when the host notices you there, you will be brought forward to the place of honor. Imagine how embarrassing it is if you take that seat in the front row. They tap you on the shoulder and say, excuse me, you belong in the back. That would be tough. Then Jesus raises the stakes a little bit higher. He said, not only when you hold a wedding banquet, not only should you not just invite people you know, your friends, those in the same social class. When you throw a party, you know that you're going to be going to their place. Kind of those unwritten social rules, We go to this place one week, that place that week, and everybody makes it nice because they know that they will be repaid with some reciprocal way. Instead, invite those who can never repay you. Jesus uses the same line, the poor, the crippled, the blind. Invite them because they cannot repay you. Invite them because that is the thing to do. A couple weeks ago, our future son-in-law graduated from Police Academy. And one of the interesting lines was the person that was speaking reminded the class, treat everyone as ladies and gentlemen. Not because they are, but because you are. Does everyone deserve to be treated with respect like that? It doesn't make any difference. We are God's people. We treat others with respect. And who would we invite? We have a food pantry here, and many of our members either work there or contribute. That's great. The LYO is making plans to help out with the Fortitude Homelessness Shelter this winter. That's a wonderful thing. Maybe we can do that more often. There's been conversations around doing other activities around it. Open your hearts and your minds. Let God stretch them and see where that leads. You've probably heard this story before, but I think it's still very fitting. There was a church, not unlike ours, not unlike most every church in the country. There's regular members that attend most Sundays. We all have kind of our spot. And like most churches, visitors are few and far between. But in this particular church one Sunday, a visitor showed up. He wasn't real clean. He didn't smell or anything, but he was a little bit tattered. He was a different race and ethnicity than most of the people in that area. And when he came to the door, the usher spoke to him and said, I think you might be more comfortable in that church down the street where people like you worship. It was a little subtle thing. The person asked where the restrooms were. He kind of noticed that people were kind of following him, keeping an eye on him. He found his seat. No one sat near him. When he did stay for the coffee time, and once again he sat by himself. And finally he stood up and said, "Good morning. I am the new pastor you have been waiting for. I start next Sunday. I just wanted to get a feel for how you deal with strangers and visitors. I look forward to being your pastor and working with you, because we never know when we may be hosts for angels and be unaware. It's clear we have work to do." Today we are invited to the banquet of the Lord. We cannot repay Jesus for all he has done. We cannot even start to repay. But all are welcome at this feast.